Do not look away. Because in 48 seconds, 2 security guards were going to walk a black woman through the glass lobby doors of Hargrove Capital Management and out onto the sidewalk of Lower Manhattan. And 200 employees were going to watch it happen through the floor to ceiling windows of one of the most recognizable buildings on Park Avenue. And not one of them was going to say a word. And in 72 hours, that same woman was going to walk back through those doors. Different entrance. Same building. Her name was on the deed. 3 years earlier. This is where it really starts. Naomi Price arrived at Hargrove Capital Management the way she arrived everywhere. Early, prepared, and watching. It was a Tuesday in October, and the air outside the Park Avenue Tower had the particular cold clarity of early autumn in New York. The kind of morning where everything looks like it's been cleaned overnight. She wore a charcoal wool coat that had cost $180 at a consignment shop in Crown Heights, where she'd grown up in a building with a super who fixed things with wire and tape, and a mother who kept the family's finances in a 3-ring binder with color-coded tabs. She was 43 years old. She had a master's degree in financial economics from NU that she had finished in 2.5 years while working as a paralegal at a midtown law firm. Because she had done the math on tuition versus lost income and calculated that speed was the most valuable investment she could make. She had been hired as a senior analyst in Hargrove's fixed income research division. Not at the top, not at the bottom, but at the specific rung that a woman with her qualifications and her background and no prep school network and no golf relationships could credibly reach in this market at this time. She understood the ceiling. She understood it the way you understand a physical object, not with resentment, but with the tactical awareness of someone who intends to go through it rather than around it. What nobody at Hargrove Capital Management knew, because she had disclosed nothing beyond what her employment application required, Naomi Price had for the previous 6 years been building a position. Not at Hargrove, in the market. She was, in the language of the financial world that she had studied and inhabited and understood at a level her Hargrove colleagues would have found startling if they'd bothered to look. A long-term value accumulator with an unusual focus. She bought the overlooked equity of mid-sized asset management firms in regulatory distress, held through the distress cycle, and exited when the firms either resolved their issues or were acquired. She had done this 4 times. The returns had been, in a word her mother would not have used, but her new professors would have, significant. She had not told her employers this. She was not required to. She had disclosed all required financial holdings, cleared all required compliance reviews, and operated within every rule the firm had. What she had not done was volunteer the information that the woman writing fixed income research reports on the 14th floor was also, in her personal capacity, building a stake in the firm through secondary market purchases of Hargrove Capital Management's publicly traded holding company. Slowly, patiently, over 3 years. This was the thing. This was the detail that nobody looked for, because nobody expected it. Because a senior analyst in fixed income research was not supposed to be that kind of player. Because the woman in the charcoal wool coat from the Crown Heights consignment shop was not supposed to be accumulating a position that would, if she reached the threshold she had been quietly, methodically targeting, make her the single largest individual shareholder in Hargrove Capital Management's parent entity. She had almost reached it the day they decided to let her go. 2 years into her tenure at Hargrove, Naomi had done something that people who underestimate analysts do not expect analysts to do. She had been right. Publicly, repeatedly, her Q3 research note on sovereign debt contagion risk in 3 emerging markets had circulated beyond Hargrove's client base and been cited in 2 financial publications and 1 Senate testimony. Her fixed income volatility model, which she had built on her own time, using public data and a methodology she'd developed across 6 years of market analysis, had outperformed Hargrove's proprietary models on 4 consecutive quarterly forecasts. The head of her division, a man named Carter Webb, who had Princeton economics and 12 years on the sell side, and the specific professional defensiveness of someone who knows when they are being outshone, had told the research director that Naomi's work was technically impressive, but strategically misaligned. Strategically misaligned was Carter Webb for too visible, and not through me. She had known this was the shape of the problem from approximately month 6. She had watched Carter take credit for the sovereign debt note in a client presentation without naming her, in a room she was not invited to, which she had learned about through a client who'd emailed her directly to say the presentation had been excellent and he'd found her analysis compelling. She had filed this observation in the same place she filed everything, accurately and without unnecessary emotion. Because emotion was information, and she preferred to deploy information strategically rather than reactively. But here's where it gets interesting. Carter Webb had a problem that was not Naomi's research output. He had a problem that had been developing for 18 months in Hargrove Capital's Structured Products division, which was adjacent to his responsibilities, and which he had been covering for, not through corruption, but through the particular kind of institutional loyalty that leads people to protect their organization's reputation at the expense of its actual health. The structured products portfolio had 3 positions that were materially mispriced on the firm's books. Not fraudulently, through a combination of optimistic modeling assumptions and deferred revaluation that the compliance team had flagged twice and Carter had characterized, in his responses to compliance, as within acceptable variance. They were not within acceptable variance. Naomi had seen the positions. Not through any privileged access, through the public disclosures that the holding company was required to file quarterly, which she read with the focused attention of a shareholder rather than an employee, because she was both, and the distinction mattered to her. She had run her own models. The gap between the book value and her model's estimated fair value was $340 million. She had written a memo, not to Carter, to the firm's chief risk officer, a woman named Sandra Holt, whom Naomi had spoken with twice at firm events and found to be the kind of person who responded to precision with precision. She sent the memo on a Thursday afternoon. She attached her models. She was specific, and she was careful, and she was, as she always was, simply accurate. Sandra Holt read it the same evening. She forwarded it to the CFO on Friday morning. The CFO called an emergency risk committee meeting for Monday. Carter Webb found out about the memo on Saturday. His golf partner was on the risk committee. He was in Naomi's office first thing Monday morning. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Carter Webb was not a man who lost his composure. He had spent 12 years on the sell side, where composure was the product you sold even when everything else was falling apart. He sat across from Naomi's desk in the same chair that clients sat in when they visited the 14th floor. And he spoke in the control, precise voice of someone who has decided that the best strategy is to make what he is doing sound like something else. He said that the memo had created a significant problem for the division. He said that going to the Crow without escalating through the chain of command was a serious breach of protocol. He said that the firm's culture depended on a chain of trust that she had. By going around him, violated, he did not say that she was wrong about the $340 million gap. He did not address the models at all. Naomi watched him speak. Her hands were still in her lap. Her expression was the composed, waiting expression of someone who has already anticipated this conversation and is now simply confirming that it is proceeding as anticipated. When he finished, she said, "The compliance team flagged these positions twice. Their flags went through the chain of command. Nothing changed. She paused. I went to the Crow because the chain of command had already been tried and had not produced a result. Carter Webb's jaw tightened. That's not your determination to make. It is my determination to make, she said. As a shareholder, he went very still. It was the first time she had said it out loud. To anyone at the firm. To anyone in this building. She had thought about when to say it, and had decided, in the particular way she decided everything, by working backward from outcomes, that this was the moment. Not as a weapon, as an accurate description of her standing. Carter Webb looked at her. Something in his face shifted through several calculations simultaneously. You own shares, he said. It was not quite a question. Enough to matter, she said. He left her office. She watched him go. She had 24 hours before the next move came. She spent them making 3 phone calls. To her attorney, to the compliance counsel she had retained 18 months ago precisely for this eventuality, and to Sandra Holt's assistant to confirm that Monday's risk committee meeting was proceeding as scheduled. It was. The next move came at 9 the following morning. Not from Carter. He had gone above himself. A man named Richard Forsyth, Hargrove's managing director, came to the 14th floor personally. Richard Forsyth was 62 years old and had built the fixed income division from a $200 million book to a $4.7 billion operation over 20 years and had the measured, expensive authority of a man accustomed to being the final word in any room he entered. He brought HR. He told her the firm was restructuring the research division. Her role was being eliminated. He thanked her for her contributions. He offered her a standard severance package and a non-disparagement agreement. She declined the agreement. He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a man reassessing a situation he thought he had already assessed. That's your prerogative, he said. Yes, she said. It is. 2 hours later, security arrived. 2 security guards, both professional. Neither unkind. They were executing an instruction that was not their choice, and they both understood, in the specific way of people asked to do difficult things for institutional reasons, that the most human way to do the job was to do it efficiently and without theater. Naomi had her personal items already in a bag. She had packed them the night before, because she had known this was coming. Because she had learned to know things before they happened by paying attention to the information that was already in the room. The bag was small. She traveled light. Always had. She stood. She smoothed her jacket. She picked up the bag. She walked to the elevator. 200 employees on the 14th floor and below. People at desks. People at whiteboards. People in glass-walled conference rooms who paused mid-sentence, watched her cross the floor toward the elevator bank. She did not rush. She did not perform dignity, which is different from having it. She simply walked the way she walked everywhere, with the unhurried composure of a woman who knows where she is going and is not in a particular hurry to explain it to anyone who doesn't already know. The security guards rode down with her. The glass lobby doors of Hargrove Capital Management opened onto Park Avenue. She walked out. Remember this. Remember the image of her on that sidewalk, charcoal coat, small bag, the cold autumn air, the building rising behind her. Remember it carefully, because you are going to need it for what comes 72 hours later. She did not go home. She went to her attorney's office, 4 blocks away, where she had an appointment that had been on her calendar for 6 weeks. Her attorney, a woman named Priscilla Mwangi, who had been doing securities and corporate law for 27 years, and had the specific professional gravity of someone who has seen enough to find complexity interesting rather than alarming, had the documents ready. They had been ready for 3 weeks. The timing had been the question. Naomi had been waiting for the risk committee meeting to be confirmed, because the meeting's existence changed the calculus in ways that needed to be part of the record. The documents were a formal shareholder notification, filed under SEC Rule 13D, declaring Naomi Price's accumulated ownership position in Hargrove Capital Management's parent entity. The position was 22.7%. The threshold for majority influence in Hargrove's specific holding structure, a structure she had studied for 2 years, the same way she studied everything she intended to understand completely, was 20%. She had crossed it 6 weeks ago. She had not filed immediately, as was her right under the regulatory timeline. She had waited. She had waited until they fired her. Not out of revenge, out of accuracy. She had understood, from the moment she'd sent the memo to Sandra Holt, that the firm's response would tell her everything she needed to know about whether Hargrove Capital Management was capable of the self-correction that a $340 million valuation problem required. The firing was the answer. It was the firm saying, in the clearest possible institutional language, that it would protect its structure rather than fix its problem. That was the information she needed. She signed the 13D filing at 11:47 on Tuesday morning. Priscilla filed it electronically at 11:52. The SEC's public disclosure system posted it at 12:09. By 1:30, Hargrove Capital Management's legal team had seen it. By 2 o'clock, Richard Forsyth's assistant had called 3 times. Naomi had not answered. She was having lunch, a quiet place near Priscilla's office, a window table, the kind of meal she ate slowly because she believed in eating slowly when you had the time to do it right. She had the time. She called Richard Forsyth back at 3:15. The call lasted 4 minutes. Richard Forsyth, who had spent 20 years building a fixed income division, and who had in those 20 years encountered most forms of institutional crisis and navigated them with the competence of someone who understood that the first rule of damage management is information, said 2 things in those 4 minutes. He said, "I think we need to meet." And he said, "At your earliest convenience." She said, "Thursday morning, 8 o'clock." He said, "Of course." She arrived at 8 o'clock on Thursday, and the detail that every person in the lobby would later describe to colleagues, to journalists, to anyone who asked about the morning Naomi Price came back was not what she said when she walked in. It was how she walked. Not quickly. Not slowly. The way she had always walked in and out of every room she'd been in, at exactly the speed that suited her and no other. The glass doors opened. She crossed the marble lobby, Italian marble, cream-veined, the kind that announces the cost of the space before anyone opens their mouth. The security desk. The elevator bank. She pressed the button for the 41st floor, the executive floor, not the 14th where she'd spent 2 years, the top floor with its mahogany conference rooms and its baccarat crystal water service, and its windows that looked out over midtown Manhattan like a man surveying his territory. The elevator doors opened. Richard Forsyth was in the hall. He had come to meet her, which was itself a signal. Richard Forsyth was not a man who came to halls to meet people. He came to rooms, and people came to him. He had come to the hall. "Miss Price," he said. "Mr. Forsyth," she said. They shook hands. His grip was steady. Hers was steadier. His general counsel was in the conference room. The CFO was there. The head of compliance, Sandra Holt, who had received Naomi's memo and forwarded it to the CFO and convened the risk committee and had, in the intervening 72 hours, done a great deal of careful thinking about the sequence of events, was there. Carter Webb was not there. His absence was its own kind of statement. Naomi sat at the mahogany conference table. She put her bag on the floor beside her chair. She opened it and put 3 documents on the table. The first was the 13D filing. They had seen it. This was a courtesy copy. The second was her shareholder rights notification, prepared by Priscilla, outlining the specific governance rights her 22.7% position entitled her to under Hargrove's Articles of Incorporation. Board representation, access to financial records, the right to call an extraordinary general meeting. The third was her own valuation analysis of the $340 million structured products gap, the same models she had sent Sandra Holt, formatted for board review rather than internal memo format, with 3 pages of supporting methodology and a recommendation for remediation that she had spent 6 weeks preparing because she had known, when she sent the original memo, that this was the document that would eventually matter most. She said, "I'd like to begin with the third document. The first 2 are background. The third is why I'm here." Richard Forsyth looked at the documents. He looked at her. Something in his face, not the managing director authority, but something older and more honest. The face of a man who has run a significant thing for a long time and knows when the significant thing is in genuine danger. Settled into the particular expression of a person who has decided to listen. "Go ahead," he said. She went ahead. She spoke for 41 minutes. Uninterrupted, she walked them through the structured products positions, the valuation gap, the methodology, the remediation options, and the regulatory exposure that the current situation created if it went unaddressed. She was specific about numbers. She was specific about timeline. She was specific about what each option cost and what it protected against, and what the consequences of inaction were likely to be. When, not if, the mispricing was discovered by external auditors or regulators. Sandra Holt took 8 pages of notes. The CFO asked 11 questions. Good questions, the kind that told you the person asking them was genuinely trying to understand rather than defend a position. Richard Forsyth asked one. He asked it at the end, after the others had finished, in the quiet voice of a man who has compressed everything he's thinking into a single sentence. "Why didn't you just sell your position? Take the profit and move on?" Naomi looked at him. "Because the problem doesn't go away when I sell," she said. "It goes away when it's fixed." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. The resolution took 4 months. The structured products positions were revalued. The $340 million gap was acknowledged in a controlled disclosure to regulators that Naomi's remediation plan had specifically designed to minimize regulatory penalty through proactive transparency, which was, in the end, the option the firm chose, partly because it was the least costly path and partly because the woman who had designed it was now on the board, and her vote was necessary for the remediation plan to move forward. She had been appointed to the board within 3 weeks of the Thursday morning meeting. Her shareholder rights entitled her to representation. Richard Forsyth had proposed it. The board had voted. She was the only black woman in the room. This was not a surprise. It was a data point, and she noted it the way she noted everything, with precision and without spectacle, because the noting was in service of the changing, not the commenting. Carter Webb left the firm. Not fired, he negotiated a departure that was described publicly as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, which is the language institutions use when the alternative is a longer, louder process that serves neither party. He was talented. He would land somewhere. He would carry with him, or he wouldn't, the knowledge of what had happened and why. Sandra Holt was promoted to Chief Risk Officer with full authority and a direct reporting line to the board. The line her role had always nominally had, but had, in practice, been filtered through the managing director layer in ways that had produced exactly the kind of blocked escalation that the structured products situation represented. She had asked for the direct line for 3 years. She received it in November. The non-disparagement agreement Naomi had declined was never raised again. There was nothing to disparage. There was instead a remediation, a board seat, and a quarterly valuation review process that Naomi had designed and that the firm's audit committee had adopted as standard practice. 6 months after the Thursday morning meeting, Naomi sat in a board meeting on the 41st floor. The same floor she had walked off the elevator onto the first time, and every time since, the floor with the mahogany table and the baccarat crystal, and the Manhattan skyline filling the windows, and she presented the structured products portfolio's current valuation alongside the firm's new modeling standards. The gap was 0, not because the positions had recovered, because they had been correctly valued and the remediation plan had addressed the underlying exposure. The gap was 0 because 0 was what accuracy produced when you gave it enough time and enough authority. She closed the presentation. She put the documents in her folder. She looked out the window at the city. She thought about the morning they had walked her out. The marble lobby, the glass doors, the cold October sidewalk, the charcoal coat, the small bag. She thought about her mother's 3-ring binder with the color-coded tabs. She thought about what her mother had written on the inside cover of that binder, in the careful handwriting of a woman who believed that the things you wrote down were the things you intended to keep. What you build is yours. She had built this, quietly, over years, through the kind of patience that looks, to people who don't recognize it, like simply being where you are. She stood. She picked up her folder. She took the elevator down. She walked out through the glass lobby doors onto Park Avenue. This time, she was coming back. She was always coming back. She had known it from the first morning she walked in.